when 9/11 happened, so thousands of bodies were actually were found in a very fragmented form. It was very difficult to actually bring them together. Say tens of or hundreds of bodies are falling down. So imagine what kind of debris that you will be getting. Say some fingers were isolated, some skulls, skeletons, everything was in a fragmented form. And that was the biggest destruction that was till that time reported. And this point of time the government actually had one major obligation towards the people, that at least return the body of their loved one so that they can actually have a dignified burial. Forensic anthropology, as the name suggests, that is use of knowledge of physical anthro to solve medico-legal cases. Okay, that is use of this knowledge to assist the agencies associated with solving these medico-legal cases. Mainly किस चीज में? Identification of remains, say by the skeleton or whatever body part are there, we need to identify that victim or the culprit. That is what is forensic anthropology. Okay, one very interesting case of this forensic anthropology was by Amy Mundorf. I discussed that. So when 9/11 happened, so thousands of bodies were actually were found in a very fragmented form. It was very difficult to actually bring them together. So suppose imagine a person falling from or collapse of a building that was on 110th floor or say 105th floor, and वो fall करके नीचे गिर रहा है. Okay, and say tens of or hundreds of bodies are falling down. So imagine what kind of debris that you will be getting. Say some fingers were isolated, some skulls, skeletons, everything was in a fragmented form. And that was the biggest destruction that was till that time reported. And this point of time the government actually had one major obligation towards the people, that at least return the body of their loved one so that they can actually have a dignified burial. Okay. But the major crisis that was faced, that how to assemble those bodies now, because the body parts are segregated, and how to go for it. Okay, so in that case they took the help of forensic anthropology, and this forensic anthropologist Amy Mundorf was hired, under whom more than 100 other forensic scholars or forensic anthropologists, they were actually working, and who worked day and night approximately for 3 months in order to assemble these body parts, and by using different kinds of testings, and then finally assembling these body parts and packing it and sending it to so and so person or the families of those persons. Okay, so that they can get that dignified burial. Okay, so this was one very large scale forensic project that was witnessed by the world. ओके तो सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम वर्ल्ड ट्रेड सेंटर गिरने के बाद अमेरिकन गवर्नमेंट की ये नहीं थी कि कैसे अटैक करेंगे, क्या करेंगे एंड ऑल दैट. द बिगेस्ट प्रॉब्लम वाज एंड faced by the city in which that World Trade Center was actually located, just to assemble these body parts so that they can have a dignified burial. Okay, so several other cases in which these kind of incidences have happened have been seen in India. Say Naina Sahani Tandoor case, you must have heard about this. So that case also, it was very difficult to identify the body of the victim, or say based on the remains whatever were left. So different kinds of techniques were used to identify the victim's identity. Okay, so here when we go for this forensic anthropology, we need to identify either the person, so in that case we use techniques such as fingerprints, or DNA fingerprinting, or we can identify based on the remains the sex of that person. So sex identification के लिए we basically go for bone analysis. So based on the kind of bones that are found at the site, we basically identify whether they are of a male or of a female. Then we need to identify the age of that person. Who basically was that person? What was the age of that person? Male, female, or kitne ho? So we will be going for bone analysis or analysis of teeth to identify the age. Then identification of races. So we will be looking at body features, mainly the facial features, skull kaisa hai, nose kaisa hai, and all such kind of features, based on which we'll be trying to identify the race of that person. And the final step is facial reconstruction. एक बार बाहर से कौन सी भाषा समझ नहीं आ रही इसको? कौन सी भाषा? लग ही रहा है. So these are the 5 major dimensions that we will be actually studying while going for forensic anthropology. First is to establish the personal identification, age, sex, race, and final facial reconstructions. So let's see the first one, that is personal identification. First one, that is DNA, sorry, fingerprint study, or what is called as dermatoglyphics. Okay. So there are 3 types of fingerprint. Arcs, whorls, and loops. Okay. ये ड्रिलिंग की आवाज आ रही है, इसको बंद करा दीजिए प्लीज. So 3 major types of fingerprints, जिसके basis पे we can actually identify the person, and everybody is having unique fingerprints. And the chance of having identical fingerprint is approximately 1 in 64 billion chances. Okay, that is the chance of 2 persons having exactly identical fingerprint, 1 in 64 billion. So we can completely rule out that 2 people can have similar fingerprints or same fingerprint altogether. So we can actually get 2 different types of fingerprints at the crime scene. One is the visible fingerprints. That is, आपको clear cut एकदम चोर ने मौका दिया है कि देखो ये मैं fingerprint छोड़ के आ रहा हूँ, मेरे को पकड़ो. Or the second one is latent fingerprints. That is not manifested, that is not visible. Okay, so visible or latent fingerprints. So कुछ बताने वाला नहीं है. That is the one technique. The second one is DNA fingerprints. So just like this dermatoglyphics, this is also absolutely unique for individual. Okay, so here we can identify the individual through satellites, so which are very much unique to an individual, micro or mini satellites. The techniques that we may use might be a use of DNA probes, or might be blotting techniques. DNA probes, blotting, electrophoresis, any kind of technique can be used to create that DNA map. Okay, so suppose karo that you go to a particular crime scene and you got a sample of a particular DNA, or say some cell sample wahan se aapne isolate kiya, and then you have 4 or 5 possible culprits. Okay, suspects hain aapke. So in that case, what you can do is you can take the DNA of those 4 or 5 suspects and take that cell sample that you have obtained from the crime scene, go for PCR, multiple replication of that particular sample that you have obtained from the crime scene, so that, and फिर उसी PCR में से एक probe निकाल लिया, probe निकाल के सारे suspects के DNA में you have to release that probe, किसी DNA के साथ जाके वो match करेगा, attach कर जाएगा, and that particular person is the culprit. Okay, so that is the DNA fingerprinting that we will be doing for identification of the culprit or maybe the identification of a victim.